Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this showcase featuring Intelliconn. And you're going to hear about a lot of this in the next hour or so. And we're really ought to be pleased and thankful that we have a former premier who remains engaged in agriculture and agri-food issues, not just over years, but in fact some decades. And it was Dr. Devine who suggested that we actually have this event. So actively engaged, I guess is the right word. We're very pleased that we took him up on this suggestion, and he has kindly agreed to moderate this particular session. So please welcome Dr. Devine.
Well, thank you very much, Wilf. As you probably know, AgWest Bio is hosting this for Intelliconn. And AgWest Bio is a really interesting place. I was fortunate enough to be involved in starting it, and I kind of call it the dragon's den of innovation here at the university, because companies come here and they have ideas, and then they search for capital markets to put the two together. And that's how I got involved. One day Will said to me, well, there's a little company over here, they need some help, whatever. They're called Intelliconn. Go over there and talk to them. So that's me. I wear a couple of hats today. I'm on the board of governors of the university, and we have university people here, professors and deans and others, and welcome. Very nice to have you here. What you're going to see here, in my view, is this whole world of being smart. We met with the mayor of the city of Saskatoon this week at the Board of Governors, and he said, I want to have a smart city. He said, you have smart farms, you have smart universities, you have smart colleges, and he says, you know, that's very relevant. We want to be able to use real-time digitized information. And so what this is about is what I'm going to point out, and Ken Jackson, who's at the back, is about him and his little company, and he's on the threshold, in my view, of probably 40, 50, 60, 70 years of agriculture, the next evolution, because he's identified a problem that he can fix, and we haven't fixed it. And it's fascinating that we've waited this long. I'm going to briefly go through it at 30,000 feet, because I'm not a mechanical engineer, I'm not an electrical engineer, and the Lord knows I'm not a software person. Okay, so I'm a cowboy. I just sort of see maybe where we could go down the road. So here is my version, very briefly, of what Ken Jackson has got a hold of in Intelliconn. I think it's the next evolution. And it's because it's digitized information, it's smart, and it's real time. It has implications for the supply chain, from producer to consumer, worldwide, but particularly here. And you'll see that pretty quickly. It has great academic engagement possibilities here at the university because of research. And I've talked to and visited with deans and faculty members in law, in computer science, in engineering, in agriculture, in business schools, and so forth. And there's lots of research to be done. And obviously there's room for the capital markets, and I think it's amazing what's going to happen in the capital markets with this kind of technology. So let me say that we produce $5 or $6 billion worth of crop annually here. And it's interesting that in good part, the problem is we don't really know what we put in the bin. And if I can just give you an example, an illustration of what I think is going to come down the pipe, is that 20 or 25 years ago, we heard about GPS. And if you had invested a little bit of money in GPS and that software technology, today you would probably be able to retire. On that whole mechanical side of agriculture, it is real time, digitized information. We have people here from Brandt or John Deere or whatever, Monsanto. They have now spent hundreds of millions of dollars, and in Monsanto's place, about $1 billion on the software to know what the sprayer's doing, what the combine's doing, what this is doing, and so forth and so forth. For what? The digitized real-time data. This is what's it's going to look like. Here's how I'm going to spray it, here's how I'm going to service it, etc. That's on the mechanical side. That's digitized. On the production side, it's analog. Farmers take a little sample when it comes out of the auger or out of the truck. Not that well. I mean, I've been doing it. I know about it. You take a sample or two samples, and you don't really know what you have. And the consequence, the whole industry doesn't know what you have. The interesting part is one farmer said to me, well, I could take my sample, I could take it, get its specification, I'd find what it is, and I said it'd be absolutely useless because your sample isn't accurate. You don't know what you have. And if you don't know what you have, there's huge pain in that supply chain. So I haul my grain into the elevator, and I think it's a 3 CW, and the guy says, no, it's a 2, because the guy on the other side doesn't know. He's got to hedge himself. He's got to protect himself. And all the way down the line, people modify, play games, hedge, do this, whatever, till it finally maybe gets in a boat. And one guy from Cargill said to me, for heaven's sakes, if it gets in a boat, and I've got a whole boatload of barley, malt barley going to Japan, and one container of that is wrong, I get sued. Big time litigation. She said, we all battle with it. We don't know. Now, in a year like this, it's huge. We don't know. You might have a guess on the volume, but you have no idea on the quality. So that's the problem. And we face it. We've got digitization all through the mechanical side, real time. People spend fortune on us. They think that they know what they're doing. Now, as that comes off, the crop comes off and is harvested, even those that have spent millions on the mechanical side don't know the result. How did I do when I was lining up all this information on spraying and this and that? They don't know. So they need to know. So here's what happened. A guy like Ken and some of his smart guys, they designed a mechanism that goes on the auger. And it takes thousands and thousands and thousands of samples as it comes out the auger. So you have very accurate sample of that. And with a little bit of software, when you collect all that, it ends up on your phone. And you take the physical sample and you get it spec'd, you know exactly what it is. And the benefit then for when the farmer knows what it is, the market power begins to shift. And I'm an old industrial economist. Market power shifts back to the production side. Now he knows when he goes to the elevator what I have. And the elevator's happy with it. In fact, the whole supply chain. One guy said to me, it's the best dream for the supply chain. If you have a single fingerprint of what you're actually producing every year, that provides us with a gift. So the benefits to the farmer, the benefits to the elevator, the benefit to the people that are processing, the crusher, the miller, and all the rest of them, all see that because we know what we're dealing with. Now there's some interesting dimensions to that, and that's why, you know, computer science is interesting. Because once you know exactly what's in your bin, the bank will believe it. And once the bank believes it, you get into the whole world of blockchain. Because I can then sell my crop to a buyer in Japan because he knows exactly what I have because the Royal Bank believes it. And also down the line. Now, if, this is where it's interesting for me as an economist, if the production side was willing to spend all that money just to know how the GPS works and your direct seeder works, so forth, guess what the supply side and the buyers and the hedgers and the markets and the processors and all of them are prepared to pay for that data. As you aggregate that data, here's one farm, then another farm, you have thousands of farms which that data is aggregated. It's extremely valuable. When you put a hedge in against something when you're buying it and it's wrong, you get what's known as a market call, cash call. Well, there are lots of those if you don't know what you have. So there's a huge, latent, I think, huge demand for data, digitized commodity data in real time. So I think there's lots of research to be done on the market side, on the engineering side, on the computer side, on the business side. all through this. And I haven't seen anything that is like this, because the software that Ken has put together, along with his mechanical stuff, is the best I've seen. And if it isn't him, it's going to be somebody. But it's here, the innovation place, right now, right in front of you. And he's been working at it, so I want to present the president, Ken Jackson.
Thank you, Dr. Devine. I have to say, you're a really hard act to follow, because you basically stole my thunder, so I'm thinking we maybe should just go right to the cookies. I do have many details that I can fill in here. I do want to, again, I want to thank Dr. Devine for the great presentation, the great setup that he did for this. You nailed it. And also Eggwest Biotech and Will for hosting this. This is a great opportunity, and you know, for all of you coming together. I think there's a great opportunity here, and expand on a bit, but I think there's a role for many people in this room to potentially play in it. So I'm going to talk about a couple of sort of related challenges that we've got here. One is you know, farmers are a very resilient group, as you know, but it's a never-ending struggle to stay viable, to stay profitable. And so the other or related challenge is we're constantly trying to figure out how do we do a better job of feeding the almost 8 billion people on the planet right now, and with another billion expected in the not-too-distant future. So we've got some big challenges ahead of us. And as historically, there's been so much focus has been put on what's going on in the field. It's all been about how do we grow more. And the thing that's happened now is that we're starting to see the wall a bit on some things. I mean, equipment, it's just getting tougher to make that any bigger. You're just not going to get it down the road. With genetics, there's been some great stuff has happened, but again, some of the bigger advances have been made. Again, same thing with precision farming, with inputs. So, just from a land perspective, as the saying goes, they're not making any more of it. And in fact, with the land that exists, we're seeing some shrinkage and also some degradation of that land. So there's some real challenges to what's happening in the field. So the other thing is and as Grant mentioned, there's been so much focus on how do we grow more and investing significant amounts of input costs to grow, and then it gets harvested, and there's sort of this void in terms of, well, what do we actually have in the bin? And the contributing factor there is, I should say resulting factor is, we're ending up with about $12 billion a year in the developed countries, and this doesn't include China or India, about $12 billion a year in grain that goes bad in a bin. We've also got about 70% of all the grain that is sold by producers is at a value of less than they should be getting. And thirdly, actually Jim Winnie from Rosetown, he's a big farmer out there, gets credit for this one. We're doing way too much recreational trucking. And essentially what that means is that when you sell your grain, there's an expectation when you deliver it as to what that grain is going to be. So if you show up at the elevator and the grain isn't what the buyer thought it was going to be, there's one of two things are going to happen. In a best case, you're going to get downgraded, and he's going to give you a little less for your grain than you were hoping to get. And in a worst case, he's going to outright reject it, and you're going to have to take your truckload of grain. And now you've got to find a home for it on short notice, because you don't want to be tying up your truck with the grain. So again, this is driven by the fact that we're sort of caught between being partially analog and partially digital. So, all of the sort of the money aspect and transactional aspect of selling grain is digital now. But the large part of the transactional is based on analog. And what I mean by that in sort of real terms is, you've got a farmer that, as long as he's got a cell phone connection, he can be anywhere, and on his smartphone, he can be selling tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of grain with a few clicks of a button. On the other hand, you've got this transaction is largely based on a guy with the scoop on the end of a stick and a coffee can that's taking the sample that underpins that whole transaction. So the fundamental problem here is that grain varies in consistency. So as you're, throughout a field, as you're harvesting, the grain will vary determining on soil conditions and highs and lows of land, and it's not just the sort of overall quality. You can see changes in protein or in oil content. So you've got this built-in sort of inconsistency in grain, which carries through when you put it in the bin. Well, now you've got inconsistencies through the bin. So, and then further to that, because bins empty differently than they fill, you've got inconsistencies of grain going out of the bin as well. So to pile on top of this, sampling is just something that people don't do very well. And the reason for it is that you really need three things for a good sample. One, you want to get what's called a cross-cut sample. And if anybody's ever watched grain flowing out of the back of a truck, it's not homogeneous across the flow. You tend to get the lighter stuff goes to the outside, and it's denser in the middle of the flow. So if you're trying to get a representative sample, you need to kind of get that cross-cut, which is statistically going to represent the sample. It's just not an easy thing to do. So the other thing is, you would like to take lots and lots of little samples so that you're getting representation of a lot of points of the flow, and you want to do that at a consistent rate. So then you're able to correlate that to the quantity of grain, and now you can build a model of what that quality looks like in the bin. So the result is you end up with often insufficient or inaccurate samples. So Intelliconn is working on a product called InGrain. It's part of our grain data and analytics product line. And InGrain really sets out to not just solve the sampling problem, but really to solve the whole digitization and sample management and the data aspect of things. So some features of InGrain are sort of first and most obviously, we continuously extract small samples, and then these samples are split into multiples, up to 6 subsamples. And again, the significance of that is that the same guy you saw a little earlier with the scoop on the end of a stick, typically what he does is he fills up a bigger bucket of grain samples. So he's taking his samples as the grain is flowing. And so within this bucket, though, you've got variation in the sample consistency. And so you can't just take the bucket and dump it into a bunch of smaller buckets or bags and expect all of those subsamples to be identical. So the problem that it causes is that you're taking those subsamples and you're sending them off to the Grain Commission. You want to keep one for yourself. You're off to send one to a grain lab. You might send 2 or 3 or 4 off to some potential grain buyers. So because the samples aren't consistent, everybody's seeing something a little different. So the one of the other key features is that we have a proprietary container which the samples are stored in, and it preserves the integrity of the sample. And I won't even go into the story about the Grain Commission telling me about a guy that came with a sample in his ball cap. But the other thing that we're doing inside of the unit is we have sensors that measure grain characteristics. We also are taking all of that information from the sample, digitizing it, sending it up to the cloud, and we're also associating it with other relevant information, such as what was the source of this grain, what is the destination for the grain, and all of it is controlled off a smartphone or a tablet. So the benefits in general terms are that samples are accurate and representative. The subsamples are identical. Your integrity of the sample is preserved during shipping and storage. From an information perspective, we now have everything digitized. It's accurate, it's complete, and also because it's in the cloud, it's now readily accessible and can be, in addition to being accessed, it can be readily augmented and the information sent back up, and it can be shared. The other thing, and Grant mentioned this a little earlier, is in real time, we're able to do spoilage risk assessment. And the significance of that is that today, the way spoilage is dealt with, or spoilage potential is dealt with, is if you happen to know that you've got some hot, wet grain, well, yeah, then it's kind of obvious, put it in a bin and dry it. The problem, though, is that there's only approximately 20% of all the grain that gets harvested is actually at risk. So you can put sensors in your bins, a temperature and moisture sensors in your bins, which will track that or monitor that spoilage potential. The problem is it makes absolutely no economic sense to have sensors in all of your bins. And back to my sort of original statistic, if only 20% of the grain is actually at risk, it makes no sense for you to put sensors in 100% of your bins. It just doesn't, it's not worth the money. So what we're doing with Ingrain is we're taking a snapshot of the moisture and temperature as the grain flows into the bin. So out of the 100% of your bins, we're able to identify in what bins there's a problem. The other thing we can do is we can also analyze that for degree of risk. To use a saying that a farmer recently said to me, said, you know, in the chaos of harvest, if I don't have to deal with something immediately, I'd rather not. So if we can tell somebody, look you know, you're at risk here, but it's marginal, and you can probably let that grain sit for 10 days and it's not going to bother. But on the other hand, if it's hot and wet and it's canola, you better do something about it right away. So then you can move it to a bin that's equipped with sensors and fans. And so again, the bin monitoring equipment is great, but it just doesn't make economic sense to have it in every bin. And so we provide a solution and in fact partner with some of those bin monitoring companies, because we provide what they consider a baseline to know, am I at risk, and then what do I have to do. The other thing is we're able to do grain characteristics assessment and grading, or characteristics identification and grading. And the way we're doing that, the kind of sensors we're using is things like a high definition camera or a spectrometer, taking that information up and using some artificial intelligence to analyze what the grain is, or what the characteristics are, or what the grade is. And I'm happy to go into how that all works later. I'm not going to get into the details of it right now, but it is quite doable. The other thing we're doing is in real time, we're tracking quantity. Okay, so at the end of the day, with the Ingrain product, you know the quality and the quantity literally as the product is flowing in the bin. So this gives us the ability to eliminate sort of all the paperwork that gets associated with trying to track your samples and what they belong to. Also the errors and omissions that go even with plugging information into your smartphone. I mean, there's lots of software out there now for tracking what's going on, but you still have to enter the information. And so a part of Ingrain is that we are doing our utmost to automate as much of the process as possible. The other thing that we will ultimately be able to, I think, largely, if not totally eliminate, is grading subjectivity. And right now, for those of you that aren't aware of how grading is done, basically a guy takes a sample in a pan or in his hand and looks at it and decides what it is. So there's a lot of subjectivity, and so by digitizing that and essentially just turning that into numbers, now it's all math. It takes away the human element completely. And ultimately, we are pretty confident that we can eliminate a pretty high percentage of the need for physical sampling. You know, and so to use actually build on the GPS illustration. You know, when GPS first came out, and if you can't relate to this, I'll do my best. But on most equipment, before there was GPS, you had a marker, or so you could see where you had been. And so when GPS first came out, they still kept the markers because nobody was really confident that the GPS was actually going to work, or did it work. And so, but now there isn't a marker to be found out there. Everybody's confident GPS works. I mean, why would you even consider interrupting your time watching the ball game when you can be letting the tractor drive itself? So, you know, technology, once people reach a comfort level with it, there's a high acceptance level, and certainly the technology does exist to do a lot of what we're talking about here. So the at a sort of producer level, what is the benefit to the producer? Well, on our estimation, on average, a producer is going to realize something in the order of a 5% or greater revenue increase per year, whether it's from reduction of spoilage, optimal pricing, or less rejected loads. And a couple of things come into the optimal pricing discussion. The first one is that if you've got the confidence and the detail of what you have stored in your bins, you can make much more informed decisions. You're in a much better position to negotiate with the buyer as to what you have. Now, on the other side of things, the buyer is much more likely to give you a bit of a premium because he knows when you show up, it's going to be actually, what he thought he bought, and he's not going to have to reject your load. So it's a lot of what we're doing is about sort of providing this standard, if you will, or leveling the playing field to make the whole process just go a lot more smoothly. The other aspect is that if with the data that we're accumulating, not only does the producer know what he's got, he can also see in an aggregated form what other producers have in other areas. And so the significance of this is that, for example, if you're sitting on some pretty good number 2, and you look out as to what else is in the market, and the market's getting light on number 1, you probably should sit on that number 2 for a while because you're likely to realize a better price on that. And for those of you that don't follow the grain markets intimately, the swing can be up to 50% difference in price. So it's well worthwhile to be able to track those markets. So from a processor shipper perspective, with these guys, again, for them it's more about reduced costs. They're paying a lot of labor either internally or externally to get information, to get the sampling done. Of course, they also benefit from the more accurate sampling and all the digitization. But the producers aren't the only guys that are dealing with rejected loads. So, yes, the producer's got the processor shipper has got an issue with if a farmer shows up and they've got to reject a load. But these guys are also, as Dr. Devine mentioned, these guys are also dealing with this. If you got literally a boatload of grain on the other side of the world, and the guys over there decide that it's not what they ordered, you've got a real problem. And it starts with, at the very worst, you're going to get downgraded, and at the most, you're going to end up in court over it. And of course, Mayor just charges every day for that boat sitting there. So once again, the lawyers and the boat owners are the winners in the thing. So the other thing that happens for the processors is that, and this was a comment made by the head of the Western Grain Elevator Association, and he said, it'd just be so nice if we were all bidding on the same sample. And that goes back to the earlier comment about getting the identical subsamples. So if you don't have identical subsamples, everybody's bidding on something a little bit different. And from the farmer's perspective, he just thinks that one guy likes him and having a good day, and the other guy's having a bad day and doesn't want to give him what it's worth. And it may in fact be that the sample is that different. The other beneficiaries in the process, though, are grading and analysis labs. There's some significant efficiencies to be gained by having digital information that is when your sample shows up at the lab, they can open your record remotely. They can take that information, start the process of administrating that sample. They can do their analysis, add their information back, close the record up. It all goes back to into the cloud, and the producer's got his information. And it saves time, it saves money. Grain buyers and marketplaces. We've got several of either shareholders or as partner companies, and they say one of our biggest problems is this issue of producers don't know what they have, and whether or not it's true, the buyers think they tend to overestimate what they have. And then the buyers, because they don't necessarily know what they're going to get, they tend to underestimate the value on it. So you've always got a little bit of this going on, and if we could provide this sort of gold standard, if you will, it would simplify the process. Another one, blockchains is a word that gets bounced around a lot lately. Blockchains are only as good as the information that goes into them. So by having digitized information that is accurate, ingrain is really quite a vital component of blockchains being as effective as they would like to be. And then traceability. Right now, most of the traceability is starting at the processor and then going to the table, and there's a gap between the field and the processor that Ingrain does a reasonable job of addressing. So this goal to have true field to fork traceability is something that we can play a role in. So now I've hopefully got you reasonably excited about all the cool things we can do with Ingrain. I want to talk a little bit about the pieces that make it up. So there's 4 major components. The sample extractor being the first piece, goes on the end of a grain auger, on the end of a conveyor, or in a grain stream. Continuously extracts small samples, and those samples are pneumatically transferred to the splitter module. The splitter module is just conveniently located for the user. It has the ability to split the incoming sample into up to 6 identical subsamples. Those samples are put into sealed, individually coated containers. And then the sensors for grain characteristics identification are included in that module as well. The control system for the unit is smartphone or tablet based. It runs off an app. The sample related information, again, is very readily, easily entered. And the user has the ability to control the sampling interval. And what that means is that the user can easily select whether he wants a set of samples to represent the B train that he's emptying, or does he want a set of samples to represent a part of the bin that he's loading, or a whole bin. So it's something that is easy to do and a value to the user. And then all the information, of course, ends up in the cloud. It's either wirelessly transmitted either through cellular or Wi-Fi connection. And at that point, that's where we do things like the spoilage risk assessment, grain characteristics determination, and that a lot of that requires artificial intelligence to do. So once all the information is in the cloud, of course, it's readily accessible and augmentable and shareable. And then the sort of final piece of this is the data that we're accumulating is really quite unique to the industry in that it is in real time. It's of a lot of value to not just producers, but a lot of other individuals or companies in the industry. One example is we have a couple of shareholders who are in the malting industry. And I've got to say that, and I suspect that everybody else would be the same, when I'm having a beer, which I do from time to time, I don't really stop and think about what went into that beer. It's more about the enjoyment of it. But in fact, the malting industry is very significant for them to know, and in real time, if possible, what's the quality and what's the quantity of grain that's available to them, because the quality of the end product is very much a result of the quality that they start with. So this data aggregation and analysis is something that's very, very important to a lot of companies. We have been working on this product for about 7 years. There's been a lot of market research has gone in behind it, and also a lot of product development. We've got about $1 million in development costs into it so far. We're planning on rolling out the base module in 2019, and that'll provide the extraction, the splitting, the storage of the sample, and the digitization, and also the spoilage assessment. 2020, we want to introduce grain characteristics and grading, and by 2021, we want to be offering the data aggregation and analytics. But from a market perspective, our calculation is that there's a market of about $4.6 billion that's accessible in Canada, the United States, and Australia. And that market is driven by almost 2 million agricultural producers, There's about 2,200 processor shippers in those markets. And there's also some very substantial global markets which we're just sort of ignoring for the time being because the markets we're targeting, the ease of access to those is pretty straightforward. So for the moment, we're focusing just on those three markets. Target revenue, within 5 years, we believe that we should be generating revenues on this thing of about $100 million in the primary markets. Within 10 years, I don't think $500 million is out of the question. So a little bit about the company. We are, of course, an innovation place. That's our office right there. To get things started, in 2016, we acquired the rights to Ingrain and several other technologies and products. We started to put together our management and operational team, as well as acquiring a number of distribution rights for other products. And those other products are what form the initial foundation of the company in terms of revenue generation, and that's our connectivity and control products. When we started this, one of the things we recognized as a problem in the ag market, and it exists today, is that there's a lot of gaps in connectivity. And so there's a lot of things that you would like to be doing in terms of whether it's calling somebody on your cell phone to tell them to do something, or accessing data, or sending data, and there's just a lot of gaps in connectivity. So we put together a product set that fills in those gaps. So where the telecommunication companies, where the wireless internet providers can't get to, we are filling in those gaps. And I think there's some assumption here that over time those guys will fill in the holes. It's not going to happen, and there's always going to be a need for filling those gaps. And in fact, with 5G coming out, which is great for those of us that can't wait for a self-driving car, it's really bad news for the rural areas, because 5G, while it can handle a lot more data, a lot more bandwidth, it doesn't go as far. So it's not going to help in the rural areas. So we put together some pretty cost-effective solutions for filling in those gaps, whether they be around the yard or whether they be across the field. And in addition to that, we noticed quite a gap in the remote monitoring and control products for on-farm use. So literally, sort of in the yard, there was a pretty big gap for example, cameras that were usable in a rural environment. So we've put together a suite of products, and we've got 16 product lines and about 100 products that comprise the connectivity and control side of things, and that's where we're currently generating revenue with the company. So from a distribution perspective, the connectivity and control products have also allowed us to establish some distribution channels. Currently the Co-op is the primary one. Nutrien is also a channel for us. Between those two, they give us about 350 locations across Western Canada of visibility. We're just finalizing a deal with TELUS, which TELUS may seem like a bit of an odd choice for a distribution channel, but TELUS is making a very aggressive move into the agriculture sector. And so they already have 24,000 customers in the agriculture sector, primarily using the cell phones, and so they want to expand on that. They want to leverage that into a variety of other areas in the ag sector. So we're kind of a real natural fit with TELUS in that we fill in the gaps where they can't get to. We have a set of products which layer on top of that for remote monitoring and control, and fit quite nicely with some of the things they're doing. And also, interestingly, the Ingrain product is of a lot of interest to them, because I don't know if most people realize this, but TELUS has got a very successful healthcare business. And their healthcare business is based on getting data from patients and doctors and pharmacies and hospitals, and managing that data and selling access to that data so if a doctor wants to access patient data, they can go to the database and get it, and for $3.50 they can look at it, and if they make any changes for another $3.50, they can send that back and update the patient file. Well, in our case, the farmer is essentially the patient, and with the other players in the industry being the other pieces. So TELUS has got quite a significant interest in what we're doing from this data management side, as well as being interested in the physical side of the product. From a competitive perspective, on the connectivity and control products, something that really distinguishes us from other products, and from an other product perspective, there's been a lot of the smart products, a lot of the Internet of Things products are very urban focused, and the urban environment is a very different environment than the rural environment for a couple of reasons. One, the rural environment is just a more rigorous environment. You need a more durable product. But the other thing that, I mean, as an urban dweller, for those of us that are, let me flip this around. Anybody that lives in the country knows that you can't just get more bandwidth if we're paying more. It's an ongoing problem, and it is getting a little better, but it's still, bandwidth and data are both come at a premium when you live in a rural area. So, and we can blame all of this on Netflix, because if nobody wanted to watch Netflix, which is now taking up 40% of the bandwidth of the internet, we could move all the data around we wanted to. But how that affects what we do, our cameras and all of our devices that we sell, remote monitoring control devices, are very bandwidth sensitive, and also both from the terms of using bandwidth and using data. And if anybody wants to know more detail on that, we can talk later. But that's something that really separates us from the sort of the urban focused pack. Local availability and support is also a big deal. A lot of a lot of producers, a lot of our customers are not within ready driving distance of a major center where you can come in and buy products. So having the co-ops, the Nutrients and TELUS's distribution they're building is valuable to not only getting the products to the producers, but being able to support those relatively locally. The last component of what we're doing is we've been working for about a year and a half developing an app which takes all of the products that we sell, and the TELUS products will be added in time as well, but it's all under one button. So it makes it quite easy to manage all the various devices that you might have. From the perspective of the green data and analytics products, and this is the InGreen system belongs of course in this, there really is no significant competition. We've seen a couple of companies that have products that are addressing the need to try and get a better sample, and so they it seems like the general way to do it is you drill a hole in the side of the auger and you screw something on it, whether it's just a flange with a tube, or another company recently I saw has a device with a motor, which does a little better job because you can time it. But that's sort of where it stops, and no one seems to have embraced this need for getting a better sample, digitizing it, storing it, managing the data, and all that. So from day one we've kind of embraced this bigger picture, and we've always set out to sort of solve a problem that's this big, not just this much of it. The other thing is we are first to market, and again, globally I am not seeing anyone else that's doing anything like what we're doing. And on top of that, we've got quite a substantial amount of intellectual property already in place, and which I just view as simply a foundation upon which I think we can build a substantial amount more. So the team, of course, to make this happen takes a bunch of guys working really hard, and we went for experience over youth, as you can clearly see. This is not our first rodeo, and we're not ashamed of it. We really have a very diverse and experienced team. We've got some really substantial product development and commercialization experience behind us, very, very strong roots in the agriculture industry, and also quite extensive company development and management capability. So in terms of the sort of guys at the top of the pile, I'm the CEO. Blaine Canix is covering both CFO and COO positions at this point, and Gary Merrier is our CIO, which is Chief Information Officer, and Gary looks after all the product development and the product aspects of the company. Our board has some familiar faces or familiar names there. Peter Lacey, who's the executive chairman of Service Equipment Corp. Rick Pattison heads the Pattison Liquid Systems. Gary Gunthorpe recently retired from a electronics manufacturing development company called Delta T in Calgary. And Guy Cadron, who heads is the owner-operator of quite a large farm in the Blaine Lake area. Special advisors, Dr. Grant Devine is of course brings a love and enthusiasm for both the province and for agriculture, and a great understanding of the political arena. Henry Katarna, James Chepia, and Ross Bricker are all on our financial advisory team. These guys have got some serious depth in the capital markets and financing. And Ben Graham, who's the Canadian head of farm. My goodness, why can't I remember this? Ad Farm, yes, I had it partially right, of Ad Farm. Ad Farm is if they aren't the largest, they're one of the largest ag-focused marketing agencies in North America, and Ben's a super guy. Our shareholders have been tremendous in guiding us along the path here. We've got quite a range of representation from various market segments. We've got a processing equipment manufacturer, two grading and analysis labs, five grain buyers and processor shippers, 9 multi-thousand acre farmers, and a dozen agricultural industry leaders that round out that pack. So what's it going to take to get this thing across the finish line? Well, I look at Ingrain as really the foundation, really the start of what we're doing. And so we provide this foundation of representative samples and the digitization, and we've solved a really big problem. There's a lot of technology that we need to add on to build all that out, to be able to do the grain grading, the analysis, the spoilage is not, actually that's something that's not all that difficult to do, but certainly on the grading and digitization, there's lots of development to be done there, and basic research to be done there. So we're looking for industry partnerships. We've got discussions going with a couple of Saskatchewan manufacturers to contract manufacture or partner with us on that, maybe even get involved in distribution. From a university and government perspective, there's a ton of capability within the university, within various government departments that we would really love to access and partner with to leverage what we're doing. We're also looking for a fair chunk of funding. We've successfully brought in several million already to get this thing going, but we need, not surprisingly, probably another several million to make it happen. So we're looking for both to private and institutional capital to make that happen. Looking for university engagement, so not funding from the university, but for the university to take a project that ultimately results in some technology that we could utilize, and we'd be more than happy to pay a licensing fee because there is so much to be done here that we need lots of partners. And a real key to making this happen is, hey, we're first to market, but it doesn't take, there's a lot of smart guys out there, and we're not very big. And so there's a lot. You need to get into the market fast and nail your position and stay there. So we plan to do that by leveraging our partnerships. So university engagement, government support has been outstanding so far. We've got between the NRC IREP program and the SRED ITC program, several $100,000. There's also multiple other programs out there that I think are applicable and that we would like to access. So, getting very near the end. From an impact perspective, I guess the thing that gets me up in the morning, and it does take a lot of energy to do this for the whole team, is we've had an opportunity here to make a really significant difference on a global basis. And this sort of thing of getting more food to the table, helping farmers be more viable, more profitable, and the as Dr. Devine mentioned, there's some serious benefits, significant benefits for the whole food chain with what we're doing. At a local level, over the next 5 years, I think we can create something in excess of a couple hundred high-value jobs. I believe there's in excess of $20 million worth of research and development that could happen over those 5 years. And so I think also, in addition to that, of the sort of in aggregate, we're looking to do about $200 million in revenue over the 5 years, and about $170 million of that's going out of the province. So this is export revenue that we can generate. So, you know, I'm a Saskatchewan guy. I'm a Saskatoon guy. We've got family and roots here, and we're not going anywhere. I'd really like to keep the technology and the jobs and the wealth here in Saskatchewan, and I think with a lot of the people in this room, we can make that happen. So one last comment on things, just to reiterate that I really believe this is the next evolution of agriculture. And this is where we're going beyond just growing more, and we're figuring out how to get more to the table. And Intelliconn is in a significant leadership position and poised to see this thing through. So I'm going to come to the end here, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have or talk to you afterwards. So, any questions? Or do you just want to get to the cookies and the punch?
Have you looked at maybe just attaching some to the combine where the farmer knows that, like, let's say he's got a field that's highly variable and he wants to maybe to keep his number 2 all in one place and his number 3 feed in one place?
So I think eventually some of the technology is going to end up in that direction. But what's happening generally right now is that you've got multiple combines and multiple grain carts. And so you've got 4 combines dumping in 2 grain carts, dumping in a couple of semis, which ends up in a bin. So today, if we can just let them know what they have in that bin, that's solving a really big initial problem. But I agree, we've got lots of discussion on, well, could this technology ultimately make its way to the combine? Absolutely.
Suzanne Cresta, Dean of Engineering. Solids demixing is the thing, that's absolutely right. Core sampling is not very good. I could send you paper. But what I'm actually really fascinated by is jumping a little bit ahead, because if you've got 20% at risk of spoilage, if you're looking at sampling across a field, I'm imagining down the road that you could divert a small amount of bad sample out of the bin in real time and keep your quality high, because you've taken out the bit that's a disaster.
That's great. Can I license that?
Well, for free. I give it to you for free.
It's public disclosure, so there's no.
But
absolutely.
It's actually, this is also got potential for farm applications.
Yes. Yeah. No, for sure. And again, it all comes down to getting that good sample and then utilizing the technology to analyze it in real time.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Have the buyers said how much they're prepared to accept the grade achieved by the farmer this way? I mean, are they still going to be using the core sampling or the tin can sampling method and still try to, like, let's say I'm a farmer and invested all this technology and I come up with number 2 and I go to the grain element and say, oh no, this is number 3.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. And in fact, the thing I didn't talk about was actually the utilization. Well, yes, I did a little bit. The utilization by the processorship, by the buyers of this technology. So the guys that have, like all the kind of the big guys, everybody that's got a facility built out of concrete, they have some reasonably good commercial level sampling capability. Okay, but that's not really applicable on the farm, and you're also not finding that sort of that product being used wherever you see a bunch of steel grain bins in a leg. That's our sweet spot. So there's a lot of mid-level, mid-market processor shippers that are utilizing sort of those types of facilities, and they don't have the sophistication in the sampling or the quality control. So they're actually a market for us, and as I mentioned, we have a couple of those guys who are actually shareholders in the company. So sort of the old, the money where your mouth is answer, I guess.
I really applaud this. I want to kind of take it up a little bit. We've got a remarkable time as in the coming weeks. I anticipate we're going to have the final bit of news on the supercluster. And I think this is a terrific opportunity to really raise the profile and prestige of the next generation of agriculture and ag data. And so I just want to applaud the timing and the convergence that I see coming down the track for you and for your team, because this is exactly the kind of branding that I think we want to be able to associate with what the supercluster can offer Saskatchewan and prairie farmers, but also the value add proposition for those consuming our products around the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we've looked at the protein supercluster, and again, it all starts with you got to know what you have before you can figure out what to do with it. So, there's some great synergy there.
It's true.
Yeah, thanks.
I think one of the first moves is to bring the Canadian Grain Commission into the next century here. We're still using the 1912 Canada Grain Act, which is a statutory grading system. And they are grading on the basis of a variety. And they just brought a whole lot of those varieties, 29 of them or whatever it is, into one class. But the world uses specification grading, milling specifications. That's what the world uses. And 80 to 90% of the grain is traded on the basis of specification.
Yep.
So whatever you do, when you get a nice sample, that's good, but an accurate sample, but you need to get it to the next stage. And we're meeting with the Grain Commission here on the 5th and next month, but we were hoping NAFTA was going to solve our problem and take a swipe at us and say, look, we've got to have that the same North American grading system because that's our big trading partner.
Yeah.
We just haven't got, we aren't going to get there without changing that grading system so that we get transparency and competitiveness. When the farmer takes the sample in there, he's got the specs on it, and he's asking that grain buyer to match up those specs with the miller. And there's many millers, of course, and they all take a little different, have a little different specs, but that's what happens.
Yeah.
But it has to happen, or you're not going to get anywhere.
You raised, Bill Cooper. Bill raised a very good point. If the world trades on specification, and we do it in terms of visual grading under the Grain Commission, obviously we're behind, because eventually whatever we sell is going to be spec'd anyway. And so if we do a poor job of it, we're behind. And like Les Henry and Bill Cooper are the kinds of guys that will ask, when they both ask me, he says, what does this thing look like and does it work? I mean, period. I mean, if you had an auger coming out, it looks like a 5-gallon pail, but the inside is magic. You don't know how this phone works either. But this, with very sophisticated centrifuges, can take thousands and thousands of samples. And it works. It's been tested, and it works. But that's the first question you're going to hear from farmers and producers, show me. I'm from Missouri. Right? But it works. But if it doesn't, somebody will modify it or build it so that it works, so we can then get accurate samples, and then we can market on the basis of specification. Because only then are we going to compete with the United States and others. Because if we've got a bit of an archaic system in forcing farmers to go through it, and Bill has shared examples where somebody had their grain spec'd on thousands and thousands of tons and bypassed the system and sold it directly after he had it accurately sampled and spec'd, and made a huge difference, huge difference. So, to me, the question is this going to happen? It's not if this is going to happen or not. It's overdue. It's way overdue. The whole other side of agriculture is in the cloud. And we're sitting here analog with a shovel on commodities. I mean, it just drives me crazy. And so If we can do a better job of that and know exactly what we have and have an accurate fingerprint and put it in the cloud. There's another example, like Ken says, he used a sailing example. He said, you know what? This sampler is the anchor. And he says the cloud is the sail. And when I get it, pull the anchor on this, he says it's going to the cloud and there's going to be a hell of a wind pushing. Well, that's exactly where it's sitting here. Somebody's going to do this. And here at the University of Saskatchewan, we've had 7 years of research that says this sampler works. And the software works. I mean, everybody has stuff. So we put the two together, and you're finally into the 21st, 22nd century. And we're doing. And where else? I don't want this to happen, God bless them, in Alberta or Manitoba or Kentucky or someplace else. Right here. And it's right in front of us. You're right. It's right here, right now. And we need. And there's lots of research to be done. Lots of engagement from the university and from the private sector and from the startup, and everybody wins. I can't think of a loser. And I haven't met a farmer that wouldn't spend a few $1,000s to put this on his auger if he's got that kind of benefit. If you go from a grade 1 to a grade 2, or a grade 3 to grade 4 in canola, it's not 5%, it's 25%. Now there's huge money there for the producer.
See, under the Canada Grain Act, the grain companies that the country elevator have the right and do, and they practice it, they blend the sample to meet specifications. They buy it from the farmer on the basis of the variety, and then they use blending to bring it up to whatever specification the miller wants. So they spend it, they have to sell it to the miller on the basis of specification, because that's, so they want the specs that meet what the miller wants and what the consumer wants that they sell to. So we're using this stupid old act here that's 1912.
There's no politics in this, right?
And there's no, but that's business.
I know.
Grain companies know how to do
Trust me,
business.
I know.
To show you how stupid that is, what Cooper's saying. I mean, I agree with what he's saying, but how dumb the system is. I took a sample of malt barley a couple of years ago over to the Grain Commission lab, somewhere over here, and I wanted to get, the malting, and I want to get chitted. Well, we don't do that. It's just something the companies do. That was the answer.
They won't grade it.
So as long as we're stuck in that bloody system, somehow that's going to get changed.
By the way, we did spend a lot of time with the Grain Commission in the research phase, to really understand what are we trying to achieve here, and there was quite a few meetings, a lot of hours spent. So that was our sort of our starting point for all this.
See, just one final point. The part that Grant Devine mentions is we have one of our people on our committee is from Manitoba. He kept his 2013 and 2014 meeting at 8,000 tons. He took it to Intertech in Winnipeg, and they graded it, and he said, I want to grade it for sale in the U.S. and sale in Canada. They said, that'll grade all number 1 in the U.S., and it's a 3, there's 2 3s and a feed sample here. So he got his producer cars, got a broker in the U.S., sold it in 2015. $500,000 difference from selling it into the Pinscarth elevator or moving it through his broker.
Yeah.
I'm Tony Benelli, the provost here at the university. I'm very excited about not just seeing here, but just a couple of comments of maybe what it offers is the opportunity. As an engineer, when I look at something like this, what you have in agriculture, you have the kind of the front end right. You know when your tractor is going across the field fertilizing it, how to do it accurately, so the right fertilizer, water, mixture, with the GPS system and the technology. What you're proposing is the back end now, that a farmer could have end-to-end knowledge, knowing what's coming out of the field and how much money you're going to get. But for us, I think the bigger opportunity here, not opportunity, challenge, is United Nations is looking as the population hits 9 billion. Can we feed 9 billion? And the biggest problem we have is spoilage.
Yep.
India could feed all its population, 50% of what they grow is spoilage. because they don't have these kind of controls. So imagine a generation from now, these systems will exist, and I'm banking on this one as the lead. You better protect your
Me too.
You better protect your IP here.
Yes.
If this goes forward a generation from now, we not only can feed them, we can make sure we control public policy, politics, free trade arrangements with more accurate information. I think that is the opportunity here, but it's really the well-being of this planet, I think, is really what we're looking at. In manufacturing years ago, in the 50s, they went to a just-in-time system, flexible manufacturing system. We don't have these huge inventories. So starting with sheet metal that came in, you knew which Cadillac would come off the line or what mixture. Now you're doing it with food, right? And I think the opportunity here for us is to how we can participate in a way. And certainly this is interesting firepower for the very intelligent people we have at this university and this province that we want to move forward. So thanks, Kim, for the presentation.
Thank you.
My name is Michael Oelke. I've been interested in working on seed quality all my life. I'm very interested in your subject. So you mentioned some of the markets you are focusing on. Can you repeat them, please?
Well, the geographically, our target markets initially are Canada, the United States, and Australia. And simply because the ease of access to their accessibility to those markets.
Yeah, so those are kind of the low-hanging fruits for you from a
Yes.
marketing point of view. I
Yeah.
understand that. So what are you expecting is going to happen in other markets? I mean, we heard about the need
Sure.
of India before, in China,
Yeah.
there's many countries who would need something like this very much. What are you expecting is going to happen over there?
Well, actually, I'm really, thanks for bringing that up, because something I didn't mention is that we've already started to work with, Trimble is a global company that has access to those markets. So, from the strategic perspective of getting the company up and running and generating some revenue and kind of, getting into the game, low-hanging fruit is always a good way to do that. And I actually personally have experience in Eastern Europe and in South America, but there's just some challenges that go with going into those markets. But where you've got a company like Trimble, who's already marketing into 127 countries, like I say, we've strategically aligned with them, and in fact, some of our rollout in Canada, the U.S., and Australia will be with Trimble, and with the idea that ultimately they will partner. So again, not only from a development perspective are we looking at partnering, we're to realize the sort of global. I'll use the dominant, sounds like a big word, but I guess it is. To really take this product as far out as fast as we can, we need to align with global companies that can do that.
And that's your point, Tony. Nobody's doing this in the world. Nobody. And I couldn't think of a better engagement to have the University of Saskatchewan leading on this research from all the areas that people are interested in, from engineering to law. Let me give you the case of law. He's the Dean of Law. What about the property rights? Right? That's sort of his specialty. Because once you have the data, then that's one thing. The farmer owns the data. And it may cost a few $1,000s to put this gizmo on there, but he said, people will be paying him for that data. And as you aggregate that data, it becomes more and more powerful, right? So you got right across the piece, you get a sample of 10,000 farmers or 20,000 farmers in the fall, and you have that data. They're going to kill for that data. But the world is waiting for these. Nobody does it. Nobody.
There's a different type of insider trading if we get into this stuff. We don't want to talk about it.
It's a great problem to have because there's so much money chasing it, but yeah, you need all the legal help you can, and computer help, blockchain help, agriculture help, business help, and the university set up. I mean, there's no better university in the world to do that than in the middle of Saskatchewan.
Is it cookie time? All right, well, thank you for listening and for coming, and there's refreshments.
There are some refreshments here. You'll stay on network, ask some more questions, have some discussion.